everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I want to welcome you to this month's P&G Alumni Network Enrichment Series webinars. I'm your host, Ileana Rojas, and I hope you're all doing safe and well. Today, we have a wonderful guest. However, before we start the conversation, I want to tell you about the Enrichment Series webinars. This is a monthly series where our goal is to connect members and to provide you with enriching content where we hope that you can learn something new and leave you inspired. And we do this by leveraging the expertise that we have within the network. All of this is part of a bigger mission of the P&G Alumni Network, which is a nonprofit founded by former P&G employees to share ideas, talents, and resources with each other, our communities, and philanthropy effort. We have more than 35,000 registered members and growing in over 45 chapters worldwide. And the P&G Alumni Network is officially recognized and supported by Procter & Gamble. Now, we connect via a broad variety of platforms and touch points, including our global conferences, our local chapters, industry events, and online content. And our nonprofit foundation also supports economic empowerment initiatives in communities all around the world. Now, if you go into our website, pgalums.com, you'll see in the front page all the different events which continue to be added day on day. So I highly recommend that you go in regularly to see what's coming up. These is just a snapshot of what's happening around the world for the next 90 days. But you can see that these are constantly changing and being updated with the latest and greatest. Now, I do want to highlight one specific event that's coming up, which is our global conference, which is going to happen in Washington, D.C. at the end of this year, November 2nd and November 4th. If you're subscribed to our newsletter at pgalums.com, you should have already received the early bird subscription email. And if you haven't, highly recommend that you subscribe to our newsletter and you get the latest information to get still a hold of the early bird registration rate. This is it's a wonderful conference. The last that we had in person was in Madrid back in 2019. Then we had a virtual one in 2021, and we're now going back in person. We have an incredible lineup of speakers, so highly, highly recommend that you take a look at that one and save the date. Let me introduce Hesham. Thank you so much for being with us here today. We're really, really grateful for the opportunity to speak with you and for you to share your expertise, your experience in terms of servant leadership, which is a topic that has been on the rise now for several years. Well, it's been on the rise for many, but it's taken really a boost the last several years. And who else better to talk about this topic than you? Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Ileana. That pleasure is mine. And hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be with all of you. I want to start by saying that I chose this topic not because I'm the best at it, but I chose it because I have tremendous passion for it. And it's because I believe it's critical for me to continue to grow my mastery of it. And I believe that to be true for all of us as leaders. But before I get into what this topic is about, I was very fortunate that P&G gave me many platforms over my 25-year career to lead diverse and world-class teams around the world. I got a chance to work in 4 continents, 6 countries, and most recently I've been leading our global femcare business that really serves consumers in over 120 countries. And my experiences have taught me early on through my managers, through my mentors, and through my personal experiences that servant leadership and servant leadership across cultures is very important. It's very important for the impact that we want to have in our business, in our organization, and definitely in serving our constituents. So I appreciate your time today to allow me to talk about this topic, and I'm looking forward to really great questions from both Ileana and yourself. Now, you might be wondering, what does he mean by servant leadership, and what does across cultures refer to? So I want to start by sharing a definition of what they mean. For me, servant leadership is about transforming the abilities of people through improvement, empowerment, and growth to deliver extraordinary things and results as a team. Leadership is about transformation. It's about delivering results. It's about creating impact through people. But the reality is there is a wide spectrum of leadership behaviors, styles, and philosophies that govern us, sometimes consciously and sometimes subconsciously. And I believe that the power of servant leadership is that it enables us to get the best out of our people by helping them unleash their full potential. And the reason why I believe this is really important more and more is if we look around us at what has been happening in the world, we see significant changes. We definitely see significant changes in the makeup of the workplace. The way we work and how we are working continues to evolve and change. Case in point, the last couple of years, where many of us have been dealing with the evolution of hybrid work method, the changes, the possibilities, but also the challenges that brings. More and more, our workplace organizations are more diverse than ever before, generationally, multiculturally, and gender-wise. And by default, there are a lot of expectations on us as leaders to serve not them, but everyone, because the employee value equation needs to be always balanced. What we give, what they give is really important. And servant leadership enables us to really, really think intentionally about that equation. Now, if we go to the next slide, I wanted to share sort of a contrast between what servant leaders do versus what traditional leaders do. And the most important thing that I want to start with is this is a continuum, meaning I do not believe that each one of us is a servant leader all the time. And I also don't believe that we are a traditional leader all the time. I believe that most of us want to be great leaders. Most of us want to be servant leaders, but intention versus reality sometimes different. And I'm going to talk a bit later about what are these dynamics that change that. But it's really important that we think about the experiences that we have had with our managers. When were we connected? When did we feel that our development and our growth mattered? When did we feel that our voices mattered? When did we feel that we can totally unleash our full potential and impact in the way that we want to impact? When did we feel that we were given the platform to be at our best? Servant leaders do that. By contrast, traditional leaders do not always see that as a priority. They revert to behaviors that might be more efficient, might be perceived as more effective, but it seldom is sufficient. The most important thing for me to distinguish when am I being a servant leader and when am I being a traditional leader is a simple statement. Do I see my role as being in service to others and what I can do for them? Or am I spending more time thinking about what others can do and should do for me? And that usually provides a good campus for us to monitor, to learn, and to have insights about our own personal behaviors, the consistency of it, as we face different events, meet with different people, operate in different cultures. So that is servant leadership. Now, if we turn the slide, I want to spend some time on the other part of the topic, which is what does across cultures mean? For a very long time, we helped our leaders grow and develop and also self-assess their IQ and their EQ. And we believe that both are important. And the higher up the leader went, the more important EQ became, vis-a-vis the fact that we really, really do most of what we do, the higher up we go in seniority through people and through more diverse. Cultural intelligence is the third, and I would argue it is very critical for the reasons that I mentioned. And cultural intelligence is really the person's ability to perform effectively in situations characterized by cultural difference. These can range from national cultures operating in different countries, continents, but also the day-to-day diversity that we live, work, and need to serve and thrive in, multiculturally, gender-wise, age-wise, etc. And if we look around us, we definitely see a big shift generationally in the expectations that are put on us as leaders. And the more our workforce becomes younger, or the more the makeup of that workforce is younger, the more that generational differences are more profound. So now that we've defined what is servant leadership and cultural intelligence, I want to move with the next slide to sharing a few practical tips, and then I will follow that by sharing 3 things that are a constant balancing act that really make the difference between when are we mastering servant leadership and when are we not. So a few practical tips. And I want to start by saying that you are not going to hear from me today anything that you have not heard before. So the value of today's session and sharing my personal tips is that will not come from the novelty of it. It will come from the reflection through my experiences and stories, and it will come from the time that you've invested to self-reflect as well. The most foundational practical tip for servant leadership is listening. I cannot underscore the importance of that. And the more seasoned as a leader, the more senior as a leader I became, the more I've come to realize that my effectiveness depends not on the solutions that I give, but on the questions that I ask. And here we need to ask ourselves, what are we personally doing every day, in every encounter, in every meeting, to really encourage people to speak and ensure that we're really listening to understand? Are we creating psychological safety for everybody to feel that they can voice their opinion, even when they disagree with us? Are we taking the time to clarify and confirm and play back what we heard? And are we spending enough time building that connectedness, both within the team, but also between the individuals on the team or not? I want to share a few stories on the power of listening, or lack of it. I remember I was about a year and a half into the company, and I was tasked with a project to really try to promote and expand, the trial of our, brands. And I tell you that brand was doing very well, and there was new thinking of what can we do to expand that trial across more consumers, and that was in Egypt, where I started my career. And I remember that idea of the project and how we should do things differently, I frankly never thought it would work from day one, but yet I was tasked to lead it. And I believe in my mind that I tried for the first 3 months to express to my manager why I believe that was not a good idea. The reality is I ended up leading the project and executing the project. And the reality is that the project actually did not work. And it wasted many, many hours of people's time. And it also, frankly, wasted, a sizable amount of money. Now, I'm a big believer that, 1 mistake is not a failure, 2 is a decision. So it was okay. I gave myself grace that I failed in this project, but I could not help but wonder, did my manager listen to what I was trying to say and help me articulate and bring what I really believed in to life so that I can change or alter the course of that decision? And I also wondered if I communicated effectively my concerns, communicated transparently my concerns. And that story had significance because it was my first failure that I really encountered in the company. And years later, I would come back to that story either from self-reflection or from sharing it with others that I am working with. Another example of the power of listening is I remember a very good mentor of mine told me once when I was starting to relocate to different countries that it is important for me as a leader coming in that I transition to them, not expect them to transition to me. Now, we all know that if there's a new leader coming to lead a team, usually there is quite a bit of questions and curiosity about how the leader likes to work or how she likes to work. What are they like? What are their preferences? And I've sort of used that simple but powerful advice of transitioning to my new team versus asking or expecting them to transition to me to really facilitate dialogue as of day one of my onboarding process. So anytime I have transitioned to a new team or to a new geography, I really spend 50% of my onboarding time in the first 3 months doing as many one-on-one as possible with different layers of the organization, different seniorities, different disciplines. And what I've found this allows me to do is to really construct the beginning of a connection, getting not only to know what they do, but importantly, getting to know who they are, getting insight into what is working, what is not working. What do they believe if they were in my seat with the privileges and the authority and the decision-making that it comes with? What would they do? How fulfilled are they working on the team? What can I personally do to help them elevate that? I cannot tell you the power of this as an accelerator in me learning and seeking to understand not just the business, but the cultures at work, how things get done, what is working, what's not working. How can I have an impact in the first 60, 90 days, not in the first year? And one of the times I was relocating back to China, and I was tasked with accelerating one of our businesses there. And I decided to do what I always do, which is to have one-on-ones with as many people as possible. And I remember that the second one-on-one that I had was with a very intelligent, articulate junior manager on the team there. And she took the time without being asked to prepare a couple of slides to share with me. And the slides had what she thought we were doing that was working, what she thought we were doing that was not working, and the 5 things that she would do in order for us to be able to serve our Chinese consumers in a more superior way, in a more sustained way, and as a result, create value for all of our consumers. I want to tell you that this one-on-one became my blueprint in the first 90 days in the assignment. It enabled us and it enabled me to fast track the decisions that I needed to make, fast track the engagements, the capabilities, the forums, the topics that I needed to facilitate our teams to work on, to discuss, to ideate. And what was most powerful about this experience was not only that I took the time to listen to her idea, but the fact that she could see that I was acting on them and that I was giving her credit on these leads. And that became a force multiplier within the organization. It became a first moment of truth for me as a leader and the importance of listening. And it enabled others as time went by to demonstrate the same behaviors, whether one-on-one or in group settings. So listening to understand, leading with questions is foundational to servant leader. Second is being self-aware. I talked about the continuum of leadership. Self-awareness is being clear with yourself on when are your actions, behaviors, and habits living up to your intentions to be a great servant leader, and when are they not? And we are all humans. And because we're humans, there is by default human error. And that human error usually happens because of some triggers. I'll tell you what I have noticed to be my trigger. My triggers are usually exhaustion or being overscheduled. If I'm exhausted or I'm overscheduled, I could place more emphasis on efficiency than on effectiveness. And let's face it, servant leadership is time inefficient. You have to go slow and to go fast. But if you're looking for, hey, here's the problem, here's what we need to do about it, and you're being instructive, you're probably going to miss a lot of the valuable input, a lot of the valuable ideas, and probably a better way to go about solving that problem. So one of the things that I tell people often is you're going to most likely get a better servant leader in Hesham if that meeting is at 8 a.m. versus 7 a.m., especially if I just returned from a 10-day trip in Asia and I'm jet lagged. Now, I'm not saying that to abdicate responsibility or to put that responsibility on them. No, the responsibility is on me. But I'm saying that so that the choices that I make to make sure that I show up at peak performance as a servant leader are important. Otherwise, I'm going to be human and I'm going to default subconsciously, involuntarily to traditional leadership behaviors, speaking more than listening, pushing versus pulling. And that's why self-awareness is really our personal growth mechanism to continue to enhance our ability to be servant leaders more consistently and more reliably. The third practical tip is getting a reverse mentor. I believe we need to really, as leaders, be humble and hungry to learn, and we need to role model growth mindset. And one of the most powerful things that I have experienced is getting a reverse mentor. And my first reverse mentor, I will tell you, happened by 4 years ago. I got a reverse mentor that late in my career. It was 4 years ago. 4 years ago, we had a business challenge in North America, one that required a decision between 2 options. And I recall that my judgment just made me sort of ask for a meeting where different people who were involved in that business and that decision had a chance to articulate their points of view. And I asked for that meeting to be relatively longer than I usually do. I prefer short meetings and I prefer smaller meetings, but this meeting was different. And I went around the room and I asked everybody to really tell me what do they think we should do and why, and if they felt really strongly against one of the two options and why. I ended up making that decision at the end of that meeting. What was more important than making that decision is the process that I went through to make that decision. I received a lot of feedback after this meeting of how this was one of their best meetings in P&G, how that was a moment of truth for them of why they work at P&G and why they love working at P&G. But the other thing that came about from it is I was approached by one of our talents, a lady, a Black lady who joined us less than a year in P&G. And she approached me and told me that that meeting meant a lot to her. It meant a lot to her because the two most senior people, me being one of them, were actually not white, they were colored. And that was something that meant a lot to her because it felt that the company was walking the talk on representation. And then she also proceeded to acknowledge how she felt not only included, but encouraged to share her opinion and be given a voice, and that I was lending my privilege to her, even though she was less than 12 months in the job. So I thanked her dearly because I realized that there was a lot of significance in that experience, even beyond what I thought. And I asked her to be my reverse mentor. Now, this was also the time where I was less than a year and a half in the US. And I was getting to understand and learn for myself the differences that have existed for years and decades of how multicultural employees experience things differently. And I cannot tell you the amount of time I've drawn on that reverse mentorship to make better, more inclusive, more informed decisions when it came to matters such as hybrid work, when it came to matters such as putting an equality and inclusion action plan that is more daring in its objectives, or in managing our employees' mental health and wellness during events such as George Floyd's and the other victims and everything that was happening in the US at that time. If I did not have access to that reverse mentorship, I do not believe that I would have been as aware or as intentional in what I had to consider as a leader. So these are the 3 practical tips, and I call them foundational. I want to share what I believe are the 3 balancing acts that we need to consistently do as leaders to master servant leadership. The first one is purpose and persuasion. I have no doubt that we are at our best and we give our best when we believe in what we do. And we do it for multiple reasons, but one of them is to have a positive impact in the world. And that's where the power of purpose, when it is genuine, when it is authentic, but also when it's connected to what we do as a business, really matters. In Femcare, our purpose is to help our consumers thrive. We provide essential brands and products that are superior and that enable them to really feel vital and take care of their health and well-being from when they join at puberty all throughout their life. We're about helping girls transition to puberty with confidence and helping all of our consumers thrive at every life stage. And that purpose, I cannot tell you, is one of the things that make Femcare very special, but it's one of the things that really, really make our people resonate with what they do day in and day out. It is also at the core of what we do, and everybody can relate to it, either because they're girls and women or consumers who experience, and need menstrual care or incontinence, or because they're fathers, sons, grandparents, uncles, everybody can relate. Now, just as important as purpose, persuasion is very important. What is our purpose? How will we deliver on that purpose to our consumers? How will we use our purpose to deliver value to our constituents, consumers, customers, employees, community, and society? And how will we translate that purpose into audacious goals that we can really work towards? Usually requires courage and conviction that we can do better than what we did before. And that's where persuasion comes in. As leaders, we need to constantly raise the bar. We need to make sure that we're redefining success to be true success. And we need that definition to be fairly stable. We can't be revising it every year. Otherwise, it's going to cause more confusion than clarity. But the power of persuasion for this purpose and for these goals that bring that purpose to life, to come bottom up versus top down, makes all the difference. Do people believe in why these goals are important? Do people believe that they will co-create the future? Or will they believe that these goals are going to be outcome-based measures of success and assessment to them? And therefore, they're not really motivating, they're actually just accountability numbers. The second one is about foresight and pragmatism. Two of the most important traits for a leader, as I've come to learn and understand from my mentors and my managers throughout the years, is the ability to sense the unknowable or the unknown, and also an ability to see the unforeseen. Leaders need to make connections, and they're expected to make connections at a higher competency and at a higher frequency than their teams. That's the value that they bring. And in order for us to make those connections, that's why we need to lead by questions versus by solution. But most of the time, there is a tension between the foresight that the leader has and the reality that the team members are seeing and that they're dealing with day to day. And it is always a balancing act to make sure that you share that foresight, you share a glimpse of the future, but also recognize and acknowledge the reality that we're dealing with and make sure that we're balanced. Too much foresight without reality check and pragmatism is distracting. Too much focus on just solving issues, removing barriers without foresight to what could be is also dangerous. And I believe servant leaders enable teams to have both. They complement their teams with having more foresight and having more of a wider view to make those connections. But they also need to serve their teams by getting to engage, acknowledge, and resolve the day-to-day barriers, obstacles, and realities that we deal with. The last one is empathy and clarity. See, human beings have an innate desire to connect. They also have an innate desire to seek approval from others. Now, we may disagree on the level of seeking approval and what is healthy and what is unhealthy, but it is clear that human beings, want validation. And that validation can take different shapes and forms, depending also on family versus career versus friend. A leader needs to be empathetic, and by that I mean needs to demonstrate an ability to relate to what their team members are going through, to cultivate a level of acceptance and tolerance to what they're doing and what they're going through. And the best leaders earn the right and earn the access from their teams to bring them into what they're facing, not just at work, but outside of work. But that is earned because it requires genuine interest and it requires trust in what people share with their leader. An important consideration there is that we absolutely need to demonstrate empathy, acceptance, and tolerance for everybody. And we need to value everybody. But that acceptance may not necessarily always extend to accepting everybody's efforts or performance as sufficient. And that's the clarity piece. It's important that we recognize that we need to show empathy consistently, but that empathy does not necessarily mean that we are not being objective or that we're not being truthful and forthcoming in what the individuals need to do to grow, to develop, or to contribute better. And one of the authors that I read and follow is Brené Brown. And in one of her books, she was talking about the power of clarity and that it is doing people a favor. And I sometimes call it tough love because, and when, my version of tough love is that when somebody in my family sits me down and they're about to give me constructive feedback. So I often use that line, clear is kind with my teams, because I really believe clarity is the biggest form of respect and kindness that we can show. And we sometimes may mistake clarity as the opposite of empathy, and it's not. Clarity is an extension of being a servant leader, letting people know when they are succeeding, catching them succeed and reinforcing that behavior time and time again, recognizing it, celebrating it, but at the same time, giving them the clarity that they need to make the progress, the development, and the growth that they need, letting them know when their impact and their contribution is great, but also letting them know when it's not. And I remember being told once that the biggest frustration that somebody can have is by feeling that they were not given access to the information that would set them up for success. And if they would have only known what they needed to do or how well or not they were doing, that they at least would have been given a chance to act on it. So how do we as leaders drive that clarity? And sometimes that clarity will not be good news for the person. But how do we do it in an empathetic, accepting, tolerant way that really talks about the behaviors, the habits, the skills, the experiences, and separates the value of the individual and reinforces that at the end of the day, you've got that person's back and that you can relate to what they're going through. You can understand how hard it is, but more importantly, follow it with actions of what they need from you or what can you do to help them lessen the load or manage dealing with whatever they're dealing with, either at work or outside. So in summary, I believe in the power of servant leadership across cultures, across national cultural differences, but also in day-to-day diversity. I believe that we as leaders know what we should be doing, but we sometimes allow our behaviors and our habits to deviate from our intentions. I believe in the power of self-reflecting and identifying what these are so that we set ourselves up to show up at our peak as servant leaders. I believe in the power of feedback two ways. Asking, soliciting feedback will only make you better. And I believe that if we really keep those practical tips, as well as those three balancing acts in front of us, we will make progress and we will learn every day. We will learn from our teams, we will learn from our colleagues, and we will learn by self-reflecting on when we are at our best and when we're. Ileana, over to you.
Thank you. What can I say? You started asking us not only to be open to everything that you're sharing, but for a moment of reflection. And I've been like reflecting this whole time. So thank you so much for sharing this powerful, your experiences, your thoughts, and all of these great points. And I'm going to start like asking questions from the audience, and for our audience watching, if you have any additional questions, like by all means, feel free to share them via the chat or the Q&A. But I want to start in one of your initial slides. You talk about self-awareness as being one of those critical points, to begin this conversation. And I've read, and we talked about this earlier, I read from both studies from McKinsey and from Gallup that on the one hand, research says that 80% of leaders worldwide believe that they are great leaders, that they're setting their teams up for success, that they have all of these qualities that make them great leaders. But on the flip side, that same research says that 20% of people claim that their leaders are actually not great leaders. So it just shows an incredible, 20% of people only believe that their leaders are great leaders. So there's a clear gap, right, of people believing that they are great leaders and they have what it takes, but not really showing it and not showing up that way. So I think that's where that self-awareness piece becomes critically important to understand. It's not what I think I am. Am I really being the great leader that I think I am? And that's when you were talking about moving from intention into action. And the question is, it really all starts with the mind, right? With how do we, because we can have all these intentions, we want to try to do things, but in the end, we end up going back to certain defaults because our mindset is not in the right place. So from your expertise, from your experience, personal experience, how do you achieve like that shift in mindset to move from whatever leadership style you have to start practicing servant leadership in a more intentional way?
That is a great question. And I tell you, when I was like listening to the statistics, 80% versus the 20%, that's indicative of the need for self-awareness, for sure. I'm not surprised because, frankly, humans, probably everybody thinks that they're great. but we know that we have great moments and we know that we have less great moments. But I believe the answer lies in what you already said. I do believe it's a matter of mindset and discipline. Okay. The mindset needs to be, it's not about me, it's about them. And therefore, one of the things that I love about P&G that A.G. Lafley, our ex-CEO, coined was consumer is boss. As a leader, of course, we have common consumers, but within the company, the consumers are employees and our teams. Soliciting feedback openly and constructively, understanding where you are is really important. Now, I believe that leaders seek feedback less frequently than they should, at least from my experience. At least from my experience of my managers who were seeking feedback from me. Were they doing it? Absolutely. Were they doing it as frequently as they could? Maybe not always. But I think it starts with a mindset of really, really believing that it's not about me, it's about them. And therefore, the best possible way for me to set myself up for success as a leader is to get constant, frequent, firsthand feedback and information and insights about what am I doing well? I want to do more of that. What am I doing? What I'm not doing? What am I not doing so well? How can I turn this around? And where is the source of discrepancy coming from between how I'm perceiving how well I'm doing versus the reality of how well I'm doing? The second one is having the discipline to identify the insights that stand in the way of you behaving, at your peak, and creating the conditions that doesn't become the case. I mean, I shared an example of, exhaustion or overscheduling for me is a trigger for me to not take the time to demonstrate the patience, the understanding, tolerance, and lead by questions versus by answers, to listen versus instruct and speak. I am very intentional, at least I try to be, about my schedule so that I really show up with the needed quality. So I do believe it's about mindset and it's about discipline. The other last thought that I would share is I do believe that as leaders, it is also very good to have the reverse mentors that I talked about, because that can be a safe, like it's creating psychological safety for you that you also try to create for others. If you pick that reverse mentor wisely, as somebody who has the courage, the commitment to help you succeed because they see their role as benefiting the organization and being your pulse on what is going on, I think this is one of the most, helpful things that you can do for yourself.
And it's interesting that you bring up the reverse mentors. There's a question about, have you used consumers as reverse mentors in some capacity, and what was the experience?
That's a great question. We do, solicit we solicit feedback from our consumers all the time, qualitatively and quantitatively. And we also do it in a way that is reverse mentorship, where we establish sometimes ongoing relationships with consumer panels that help us really understand how well we're doing and also help us co-create solutions so that we can serve them better and in a more superior way. We definitely do. And I tell you what, as somebody who does not experience menstruation and not bladder leaks, at least not yet, I really need to do that very intently. I need to be a catalyst for my team who I'm very proud are very diverse, gender and multicultural, but I need to also do it firsthand with our consumers, because otherwise I would be very ill-informed, as a identified man who does not menstruate, for example, and doesn't have leaks yet.
Yeah.
And that is a role model sort of responsibility as well for me, for the rest of the people in my team who also have the same sort of, I don't want to call it barrier, but at least don't have access to that firsthand experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking of global cultures versus company cultures, what's your advice on how much one should adapt to accommodate the other?
It's a great question. I believe both are required, and a lot of richness comes from the integration of both. I believe that global or national cultures are there and they're not going to go away. And the more you embrace, understand, celebrate them, the more you're going to be able to tap into that wealth of knowledge, wealth of skills, wealth of competencies, but also wealth of humanity. By the same token, a company culture is very important, but I believe a company culture needs to be the few things that are really important. And I think that these few things tend to be universal truths and human truth that do not necessarily always or should not contradict whatever national culture you're operating. They may manifest differently, but they do not contradict.
We have several comments of just congratulations overall, that you're an incredible speaker on this topic and the best manager ever and most inclusive leader in P&G. So I just wanted to share those.
Thank you.
We have still a couple of minutes left. I think we have space for one more question. How do you balance taking feedback and adjusting your leadership style with remaining authentic to yourself and your personal style?
That is a great question. I tell you, it is my lifelong practice. First of all, my authenticity is probably my biggest value, okay, as just individually. I think the feedback that I seek is about how effective and how intentional I need to be as a leader to serve everybody. How I do it does not necessarily need to contradict with authenticity. So I give you an example. I am one of the leaders who you would hear about is he has very high standards. He's very demanding. That is me. I believe in potential. What gets me motivated is this idea of I can be a catalyst for helping people reach their highest potential. And by default, that means I want to make sure that we are stretching each other to get there. If I get feedback, hey, maybe I'm not balancing that enough with recognizing and celebrating the now and recognizing and celebrating our teams, I am not going to stop being that daring, demanding leader. I'm going to strike a better balance, and I'm going to seek to understand what are the moments, what are the acts that I can do that second part better than I'm doing it today. And versus showing up and all of a sudden, everything is wonderful, everything is great, we don't need to do anything better or more. That's not going to be me as an authentic leader. I am also a leader that I would tell you, like I hear sometimes, like, I wear my heart on my sleeve. How I feel, you will know it on my face. And the more senior I've become as a leader, the more I've had to realize how the weight of my word, spoken and not, how the weight of my body language has completely gotten elevated as the years went by. So I try to do it in a way where I share genuinely what I think, but I need to factor in the weight of that so that it does not become over magnified. And I often think about everybody that I've met at P&G, wakes up, comes and wants to succeed. But the experience that they have with me can really change how they act, not only at work, but how they go back to their family and experience that. And I try to reflect on that because I want to make sure that I am a catalyst in giving everybody a great experience and a great day. It doesn't mean that it's going to be always positive and challenge-free, but it needs to be one that is empathetic, respectful, and constructive. And I leave you with one of my favorite quotes. I'm a quotes person, just so you know. I refrain from using 10 quotes today, but one of my favorite quotes is Maya Angelou, who said, "People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And that resonates a lot.
Yeah, I use that one a lot as well. We do have a couple more minutes, so I'm going to squeeze one more question in. How do you know if you're not listening enough? And you already talked about the trigger that you have, but any additional, have you caught yourself making wrong decisions?
Great question. I would tell you, me, myself, my mind, I think with connections. Of course, I've learned at P&G, sequential thinking, logical thinking, analytical thinking, all of that. You've got to do that and have that as a, but my default is making connections, okay? And the more I'm making connections, the more I am listening, but I sometimes get passionate about the connections and the ahas that I'm making that I can involuntarily and subconsciously start interrupting people, even though I don't mean to do that. So when I start recognizing that I'm doing that, it means that I'm not listening. I need to kind of breathe, take a step back, and really, really breathe and lower that temperature of excitement to allow people to speak more. So the question is, what makes you not listen? For me, it is about being overexcited about an opportunity or a connection. Or it can be not feeling heard or not feeling that I am getting the outcome that I need. And in these particular cases, again, the mindset, the paradigm shift is I'm more likely to do a better job, to get a better decision taken by listening to understand the objections, to the questions, to the barriers, to the concerns, and I would tell you that in 100% of cases, when faced with a problem, I've focused more on listening versus speaking or giving a solution. We got to a much better solution faster and more effective. And I just need to keep reminding myself of that.
Thank you. Definitely a constant, this is constant work. This is everyday work. Thank you so much for the time, for, the words of wisdom that you've shared with us today. Any final words?
Thank you for the opportunity. And I want to end by saying that again, I really value that you allowed me the forum to speak about a topic that I'm very passionate about, not because I'm the best at it, but because I'm a work in progress, like all of us are. And if we keep that in mind and allow ourselves to grow with intentionality, focus on organized action that turns into habits, I believe that we will really unlock incredible amount of impact, positive on everybody that we serve and everybody that we work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hesham, really for your time and for sharing this space with us. And let me just share my screen again. Okay, there we go. I just have a couple of announcements to make. Get involved, sign up for updates, pgalums.com, so that you can also get our newsletter and be aware of the conference that's coming up in November. Support our foundation, pgalumnifoundation.org, or partner with us. There's a lot of different ways to do that. Or you might want to volunteer, start a chapter, join a chapter, or just share any thoughts that you might have. Send us an email at hello@pgalums.com. Today's webinar was recorded or is being recorded, and all of our past webinars are also recorded, and you'll be able to find them both on our website, but you'll also be able to find them on YouTube. So subscribe at pgalums.com and YouTube for the PG Alumni Network, and you'll be able to find this and all the past webinars as well there. Hesham, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day wherever in the world you are.